Jin-woo moved like a blade through a rain-washed alley, the gun in his hand warm from the night's work. He had come for blood and left with a cleaner map under his shoes. A rival gone, men rearranged. The city hummed neon and wet asphalt. He wanted the ordinary now, his bed, the quiet of his compound, the small home that had grown around his life of violence. He wanted Rosa. He pushed through the heavy steel door, and the lock clicked. The foyer smelled of jasmine and cigarette smoke. A lamp threw a slow amber circle. He heard nothing but a faint breath from the rooms beyond, a domestic rhythm his business had not earned for him in months. He found her in the bedroom. Rosa lay on her side, hair fanned across the pillow like a dark flag. Someone else lay tucked close to her, shoulder to shoulder, the way a man might curls in sleep. The face lit by the moon was a face Jin-woo knew, Min-jae. Dead for 2 years, buried under a funeral wreath that had felt to Jin-woo like a seal. The sight punched the air from his lungs. The tattoo at his neck lifted with each sharp breath. The ink on his hands tightened with impulse. He closed the door behind him without a sound. The house held its breath. Rosa turned at the soft click and for a moment was blank with sleep. Then alarm cut through and her eyes, deep, dark, sharp, found his. She flinched as if every small sin had become visible at once. "Jin-woo," she whispered. Min-jae opened his eyes and smiled in a way both familiar and devastating. He's had the same half grin that used to put Jin-woo's temper on edge and his chest in knots. "You're late," Min-jae said, soft, as if greeting an old friend. Jin-woo's voice was a blade wrapped in silk. "Get out." Min-jae swung his legs over the bed calm, as if the room and its trespasses belonged to him. "You always did prefer surprises." Rosa sat up. Her hands trembled. "Jin-woo, please," she said. "This isn't how it looks." "It looks like you slept with my dead brother," Jin-woo said. The words left him too small and too loud at once. She buried her face in her hands, and the small sound she made, equal parts shame and grief, cut farther than anything else. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said. "You have to believe that." "You tell me a story," Jin-woo said, stepping forward until the space between them tasted like war. "Make it quick." Min-jae's smile thinned into something sharp. "You killed Sang-ho tonight," he said. "You didn't finish anything. You made room." The claim landed like a shove. Jin-woo's fingers twitched toward the gun he kept habitually. "We finished it," he said. "His men are dead." "You finished a man," Min-jae said. "You didn't finish the fear that eats the crew at night." Rosa's face collapsed into lines. "They're lying to us," she said. "It was Kim Hwan. He came to me." Jin-woo had trusted Kim Hwan the way a king trusts a quiet hand, hands that moved silently through ledgers and whispers. The name tasted like ash in his mouth. He had never imagined Hwan as a blade, only as a man who kept books. Now the idea of a knife in that hand made his skin prickle. "Don't name him," Jin-woo said. Even his breath had an edge. Min-jae ignored the warning. He had the look of someone who had found a truth he thought he deserved. Hwan arranged things. He let Sang-ho burn, let the market thin, and tried to seat a softer boss at your table. Jin-woo's laugh was a small, cold thing. "A softer boss who signs my ledgers? He would die for ink." Hwan's face was all calm risk and polite demeanor when they found him in his office, a small room that smelled of old paper and expensive tobacco. He sat behind the desk as if it were a throne. He didn't stand when Jin-woo came in, only looked up with a smile that was all consequences. "Boss," Hwan said, the word served like a plate. "You knew he would come back," Jin-woo said. Hwan steepled his fingers as if the world were an equation, and he had all the correct answers. "Rumors travel." I advised caution. You staged them, Jin-woo said. You put them together. Juan's smile thinned, but he didn't stumble. We make choices to protect our business. Min-jae didn't wait. He stepped forward with the bluntness of a man who had been a ghost too long. You moved men, Juan. You arranged for Sang-ho's hold to fail. You whispered to captains that you'd find them softer under new management. Enough, Jin-woo said. The room folded in on itself. Juan's eyes darted to Rosa and cataloged her like another asset. Rosa's voice was small and accusing at once. He told me to sleep with him when he returned. He said it would make you see things differently. Hwan's expression did not change the way it would have under guilt. He had the detached composure of a man who makes chess moves with other people's flesh. I sought stability, he said. We were bleeding. Softening the boss would restore order. Softening? Jin-woo laughed again, and this one had teeth. By orchestrating betrayal, Juan's jaw worked. This city requires management. Warriors burn themselves out. Men die for pride. We can't risk all the business on your temper. Min-jae pointed at Juan as though the man were a moth to be crushed. You think you can manage men from behind paper. You think loyalty is a ledger entry. You're wrong. Jin-woo watched Juan's hand twitch toward a drawer, slow as a magician reaching for a trick. The motion was enough to make him move. The room erupted into a choreography of trained violence. Juan dove for cover. Men reached for guns. Min-jae slipped behind a bookshelf like water, finding new contours. Rob screamed once and then folded into the shadows. Jin-woo's shooting was efficient and cold, the act of surgical removal rather than fury. When the smoke cleared, Juan lay on the floor with a spreading stain at his ribs. Min-jae leaned, breathing hard, a cut at his brow. The men in the corridor muttered and swapped looks. The office smelled like burnt paper and the thin copper of spilled blood. Jin-woo didn't feel triumphant. He felt a hollowing and a tightening at once, relief and a new emptiness. He had acted for order. The result was order and a man less. You could have done this quietly, Min-jae said, voice rough. You didn't need to spill more noisies. I don't let men sell my back, Jin-woo said. Rosa folded in on herself like a bird in a storm. I never loved Min-jae, she said. The confession trembled in the room. I loved what he said he could offer. Home, safety. You weren't there. I was afraid. Juan used that. Jin-woo's chest ached in the way old injuries ache when weather changes. He thought of nights on the streets while Rosa waited with an oven growing cold. He pictured simple things he had traded away. A morning coffee shared, the way she used to laugh at a joke he barely remembered. Why did you sleep with him? He asked, not expecting a clean answer. Because he listened to me when I was invisible, Rosa said. Because you were gone. Because Juan made it look like the safer move. I didn't think it would hurt like this. Min-jae watched her with a look complicated and soft. I didn't seduce her, he said quickly, as if the correction mattered. I gave her a place to speak. She chose. Jin-woo swallowed hard. Betrayal had many faces. Cold calculus, cowardly deals, soft loanings, and they all left the same burn. He thought of the men under his banner, who would smell weakness and tilt. He thought of his neck tattoo and the hands that had done most of the work, the ones inked and scarred in a language of survival. Leave, he said suddenly to Min-jae, surprising himself. Go before dawn, take what you need, and vanish. Min-jae's laugh was small. You want exile to be a verdict? I built myself out of absence. I can leave. You stay, and I'll kill you, Jin-woo said. He did not want to say it. He didn't want to feel the way killing a brother would feel under his fingers. But leadership had been forged on such choices. He could choose the harshness and keep his world. Then kill me, Min-jae said, not flinching. If that makes you whole. The option hovered between them like a blade dangling from a rope. Jin-woo met Min-jae's eyes and saw a mirror he hated and couldn't ignore. He imagined the clean cut of revenge and the long, dull ache that follows. He thought of the men who would whisper and choose sides, whether or not he had a brother with breath. Min-jae stepped back and walked into the night like someone moving through unwelcome memory. He paused at the threshold and looked at Rosa with something that might have been tenderness. I didn't want to take her, he said, voice small. I wanted her to decide. Rosa touched his hand for a second and then he was gone. What followed was not a sheet of triumphant control but a slow, recalibrating war. Jin-woo tightened the crew's ranks. Men were reassigned. Hwan's allies were dealt with through quiet means. Money redirected, favors traded, threats made, and notarized. The empire sighed and steadied, not healed, but functional. Rumors still rippled. Power is an ocean of whispers. Jin-woo learned to let them lap his feet without drowning him. Rosa stayed close in a way both tentative and hungry. She answered questions with bluntness and with the tiny, urgent details of a soul asking for rescue. I wanted safety, she told him once when he asked for honesty at 3 in the morning. I wanted to be seen by someone who slept at home. I never wanted to betray you, Jin-woo. He listened and listened until words were not the only language they shared. He tried to be present in ways that felt like repairs. Breakfasts heated on time, a hand in the dark while she slept, a call to say he was coming home. He learned to balance the ledger not only of money and respect, but of presence and small living kindnesses. It was unfamiliar work, and he was clumsy at it. But he persisted. Months slid by like cards through fingers. The men who had thought to trade loyalties moved slower and chose their smiles with caution. The city's nightlife hummed as always, a lattice of deals and low packs. Jin-woo's tattoos showed in the morning light when he rolled up sleeves, both marks of damage and maps of memory. Sometimes the specter of Min-jae rose in him like a draft under the door. Sometimes he caught a scent of jasmine and thought of what he had almost lost. One rainy evening, an envelope slipped under his door. A photograph inside showed Min-jae on a Busan platform, a scarf against the wind, a look that said he was not finished. On the back, 3 words in an old scrawl. Forgive me, brother. Jin-woo held the picture like it could cut or heal. He didn't hunt, he didn't rage. He put the photograph on his desk. Rosa found it and picked it up with 2 fingers, the way a priest might pick up a relic. Do you forgive him? She asked. He thought of funerals and of the man in the photograph with a scarf. He thought of the nights he had chosen empire over ease. He thought of Hwan's ledger and the gunmetal in the office. He didn't answer quickly. Keep it, he finally said. Maybe we'll find an answer. Rosa placed it in a book she read sometimes and closed the cover like a lullaby. He learned to be less certain that every wound required fire. Sometimes wounds required attention, stitches, and time. Rumors shifted and snapped. Min-jae seen in ports, Min-jae in Shanghai, Min-jae nowhere at all. Jin-woo watched them like a doctor watches a fever and made the kind of slow adjustments that steadied a patient. He let some men go and kept others close. He refined violence into strategy and tenderness into policy. One morning, a messenger came with a single line, Min-jae wants a meeting. Jin-woo read the note twice and folded it with the same care he would a dangerous thing, he told Rosa. She watched him, measured and more sure. They agreed on a neutral place. The warehouse district by the river, where empty buildings carried echoes and no one expected kindness. Rosa stayed in the car, her profile a silent prayer in the leather seat. Jin-woo walked in alone, feeling the city seam beneath his boots. Min-jae waited with the patience of someone who had lost the right to hurry. He wore no posture of command. His hands were empty, and his face older, without the sheen of being the ghost of a man. "Why now?" Jin-woo asked. "Because I was tired of running," Min-jae said simply. "Because I wanted to see what you'd become. Because running taught me to look." They're talked for hours, not of empires but of small betrayals, of reasons that stack up until the ground shifts. Nights away, promises broken, fear that looks too much like self-preservation. Min-jae didn't ask for the throne. He wanted a place, a role that didn't require pretense. He wanted to be seen as a man, not a rumor. Jin-woo listened like a man learning to shape the clay of his life again. He offered nothing grand. He offered a chance to sit at the table as a reminder, not an heir. Min-jae considered the offer, then nodded. They walked out of the warehouse like two men who had settled a debt of heart in the currency of conversation. It was not forgiveness. Real absolution is rare and slow, but it was a start, a patching of a net, so that the hole did not grow under every storm. Life adjusted. Jin-woo remained iron for necessity and softer where it mattered. He taught his men a new rule. Loyalty meant presence. A man who could not be counted on at home would be watched at work. Rosa began to reclaim songs that lived in her like secret heat. She cooked again in the mornings and filled a room with small fragrances that felt like peace. Sometimes, at night, Jin-woo would stand alone on the balcony, and the city's lights looked like a ledger of lives he had touched. He thought of Min-jae walking away and the photograph with the scrawl that asked for forgiveness. He thought of Hwan on the floor and the slow prick of guilt that surfaced like spring. Once, at the kitchen table, Rosa asked him something he had not heard in years. "Do you regret everything?" He did not answer at once. Regret is a many-headed thing. He thought of the men he'd lost and the men he'd protected, of the nights he'd stepped into alleys for currency and power. "I regret that I didn't learn sooner to hold both," he said finally. She reached across the table and placed her hand on his. The touch was simple and heavy with meaning. "Then change," she said. He promised the change like a small private vow and began the slow work of living by it. He did not become soft. He still made decisions that would make lesser men flinch. But he learned how to anchor a person without losing the edge the world required. The empire did not crumble. It shifted. Men who wanted to be light in a room of knives found their place, and those who wanted to stab found the wrong door. Months later, Min-jae sent a clean note. He would help from the shadows, a ghost who reminded Jin-woo of vulnerabilities. The arrangement was awkward and fragile. It was honest. Jin-woo accepted it. On an ordinary night punctuated by rain, Jin-woo found an envelope under the door again. This time, inside, was a photograph of him and Min-jae years earlier, arms around each other's shoulders after a small victory. On the back, a smudged line. "We're both ash if we burn everything." He kept that picture where he could see it while he worked. Sometimes he would look and feel the old ache soften. The work was not over. There would always be men like Hwan and secrets like the night in the office. There would always be choices lining a path like landmines. But he had learned to step with attention. Roses began to sing again at night sometimes, voice low and half certain, the sound catching in the rooms like moths in a lamp. Jin-woo sat and listened and learned the art of being present. The tattoos on his neck and hands were maps. They marked the roads he had walked. Now he walked them with a better map in his head. a map that included a person's, not only a ledger. A month before winter, a man brought a rumor. Min-jae had been spotted in Shanghai. Jin-woo smiled, a small thing. Rumors are wind. They chill but rarely do the work of men. He walked to the balcony with Rosa at his side and watched the city breathe. "Will he come back?" she asked. "He might," Jin-woo said. "He might not. But if he does, we will be ready." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a moment his chest felt less like a war drum and more like a place that could hold a small, steady heartbeat. He had killed when needed and spared when he could. He had learned that being leader meant a balance between taking and keeping. He would remain ruthless where it mattered, gentle where it saved something. One night, a message came through. Someone wanted to hear the story of how Jin-woo rebuilt after betrayal. As he listened to the men retell the night in the office, their versions changing like gossip at a market, he realized he had become something he had not planned to be. A man who could wear a crown and still make room for a cup of tea on the table. If this story gripped you and you want the extended scene where Jin-woo and Min-jae finally decide the terms of their piece, like the video and leave a comment saying which character you want next. Rosa's past, Min-jae's life on the run, or Jin-woo's slow reform, and share the video with someone who loves dark city stories. Subscribing helps bring more of these nights to the screen. He kept the photograph on the desk. Sometimes he stared at it until the edges blurred. He did not know if forgiveness would ever fully come, but he knew he had traded something for a steadier chair. He had learned to be a ruler who could also be seen at sunrise making coffee. The empire still required vigilance, but it would no longer be the only thing to live for. Winter bent toward spring. One dawn, a man came to the compound with a single word on his lips: reconciliation. Min-jae had sent intermediaries. He wanted to meet again, this time with clearer terms. Jin-woo agreed, and Rosa sat with him across the table where light came in small and honest. They spoke for hours, not as enemies nor wholly as brothers, but as men sealed by common roads. Min-jae asked not for the throne but for a seat at the table, to be a reminder and to be part of a life that would not shred him further. Jin-woo offered a measured place. Not an heir, not a pardon, but recognition. They walked out after the talk with less heat and more measured warmth. The cities would whisper as it pleased. Men would test and be tested. But Jin-woo moved forward wearing the weight he had chosen with a different set of hands. More careful, less lonely. Rosa began to open a small shop one day, a little place that sold plates and pastries and music she hummed while the oven did its work. Jin-woo visited often and learned the names of pastries he used to eat on the run. He learned that being present could be a weapon for salvation too. The tattoos on his neck and hands caught the light as he reached across the table to take her hand. He no longer needed violence to prove himself. He simply needed to show up. There were nights when the past rose like smoke. There were choices that hurt and decisions that still tasted of iron. But he had learned to carry those choices like metals rather than anchors. If you want more of this world, more returns, more reckonings, or a deeper dive into Rosa's fight for safety, drop a comment and tell which thread to pull. Share this with someone who loves a story that keeps its teeth and its heart. Hit like and subscribe to follow the next chapter. He kept the photograph of the two brothers on his desk and a small song on his tongue when he woke. He had not been softened into softness. He had been sharpened into a new kind of focus. He would still rule the streets when needed. And he would still stand in the kitchen when dawn came, A man with tattoos and a hand that would no longer only sign death, but would hold a cup for someone he chose to keep. Outside, Seoul kept going, neon, rain, movement, men who measured their lives in deals and danger. Inside, a man with ink on his neck and on his knuckles learned to measure his days in moments with a woman who had been beautiful and brave and simple in a way violence couldn't touch. He learned to be present and to be ruthless in the ways that mattered, sparing what could be spared and taking what could not be left to rot. The world did not change all at once. But someplace between the alley and the balcony, between gunmetal and jasmine, Jin-woo found an uneasy, hard-won peace. He kept his shoulders square and his hands steady. He had the empire, but now he had something else too. A reason to come home.